urban futures in Asia. As we've seen in the earlier sessions, we set out the broader historical and conceptual frame for the course. We began by thinking about the city through its extended political histories. We then examined how subaltern groups have articulated demands or have been trying to articulate demands for a humane and just urban order. Today's session builds on this foundation. It does so through two lectures that engage with the theme, the experience of public disasters, whether climatic or epidemiological, and the solidarities of care and mutual protection that arise in response. Each lecture, as in the past, will be structured as a 30-minute presentation. This will be followed by a 30-minute discussion. I shall now hand over the session to my colleague Sifa, who will be introducing the speakers and take the discussion forward. Sifa, over to you.
Okay, thank you, my Priya, for introducing me. So I'd like to introduce first of one of our speaker, Dr. Ishita Day. She teaches sociology at South Asian University Delhi and is a member of Kolkata Research Group. She's an author of Sweet Axis Crafting in Mishti in Bengal. She's working on internal migrant journeys, and her artistic project on smells was showcased in Kiran Nadar Museum, Delhi, India Art Fair Parallel event in Sima Kohli Studio in 2025. Serendipity Arts Festival Goa 2025 and Start TRI Collab Art Show Third Space. She is the co-editor of journal Society and Culture in South Asia and is part of the editorial collective Gastronomica. And the second speaker is Dr. Indrajit Pal. Is an associate professor and chair of the Disaster Preparedness, Mitigation and Management Program at the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. Earlier, he served at the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Mussoorie, training in the Administrative Service Officer. With over 21 years of experience, his work bridged research, policy, and practice in disaster risk governance, resilience, and capacity building. He has authored 15 books and over 100 scholarly articles. So, before we start, I think Dr. Ishita Day is already in here. So, over to you, Dr. Ishita Day. Maybe we can start our first lecture.
Thank you so much, Priya and Sifa, for introducing us. And to set out to do in this 30 minutes is try and take you through some of the research that stems from Calcutta Research Group's work on epidemiology and the disasters that unfolded, particularly related to climate, which also kind of shapes that how I arrived at this idea of trust. The abstract that I shared with the organizers was, how do we really think about workings of trust, particularly, and this comes from one of my colleagues at Calcutta Research Group, Dr. Debashri. In her work on those floods in a particular city in the northeastern state of India, Silchar, she beautifully kind of shows that how the floods in 2022, when the floods happened, how a minority group got accused of breaking the dike. Right. The research is already available in the Calcutta Research Group's website, and I think I would really urge you to take a look at it. Another popular documentary film, All That Breathes, by the documentary filmmaker Shaunak Sen, really talks about, how the kites are flying all over the garbage dump of Delhi. And there's a beautiful scene in the movie which is quite telling of the city where I'm currently located, of the foam that appears on River Yamuna. Right, and these two brothers, the film beautifully follows the lives of these two brothers who have all throughout their life, they have engaged in rescuing kites. And why kites? Because they really feel that without kites, the city's garbage dump is going to go on increasing, and kites kind of maintain the ecosystem of the city. Both Debashree's study, where she foregrounds, that how in times of climate change, the social stratification ends up deepening, that how a minority community gets accused, and this is something we also saw in different parts of the globe to do with the pandemic, right? If we remember the kind of warlike metaphors that were used during the pandemic, clearly kind of shows that how diseases stop being diseases, and there is the metaphors of control, containment, risk, borders, all of this we saw in the way in which we talked about the pandemic. This makes us think that when we really think about care and protection, where do we place trust? Why trust is important in today's climate? If we really look at the theoretical bearings of the trust, and this I'm referring to one of the readings that I've already shared with all of you, if you have access to those readings. In one of the readings, it clearly points out that the idea of trust was the bedrock of liberalism, right? But with rising authoritarianism across the world, who do we trust? And when it comes to cases of mistrust, as Debashri is showing in her study of Silchar floods in 2022, do workings of mistrust actually come on the minorities, or the burden of the workings of trust, do they end up shaping the lives of the minorities more than the majoritarian communities? This is something that I think we really need to think about. How and why? If we really look at, and this is very with a deepened purpose, I actually kind of shared Pankaj Sekseria's, the case study on Andamans, where he's beautifully arguing in all his work, even the article that I shared, that where he's beautifully arguing that, on one hand, when the settlers in this particular island of Andaman, when they are actually, encouraged to also destroy the forest, right? So on one hand, responsibility of care and protection also comes with the changing political ideology, and this is something that we need to think through. The second point that I want to flag about the workings of trust, this is something to do with particularly with the epidemiological crisis that we faced, and this is and here I'm referring to our own work on pandemic. There's a beautiful volume that Dr. Banerjee and others edited on what was experience of India's migrant workers and others with the pandemic. We really saw that in the aftermath of the pandemic, the migrant workers abandoned the city, right? And all of us woke up to that horrifying image of migrant workers taking on the highways, taking on railway tracks in India, and walking back to their homes, right? When we really think about this image that has stayed on, I think, in public memory and will continue to stay on in our public memory, it clearly tells us that who the city kind of fails, right? Who the city kind of fails, and that has the city failed to create a relationship of trust with the migrant workers. And here, I think it's very important to bring to the forefront the spatial organization of the city, right? If you really look at, where are the migrant colonies or the population are settled, this is something that I'm borrowing from a previous work where we have shown that the migrant workers are always at the peripheral limits of the city. Right. So conveniently, there are various sort of, walls that the city keeps on erecting, right? Both metaphorical and material, right? And the material, to understand the material and the metaphorical worlds, it's very important to understand what are the access points the migrant workers have to a city. Where are the railway stations located? Where are the bus stations located? Where are the metro stations located? The city that I come from, that I'm based in right now in Delhi, all the bus stations and the railway stations, as well as the city that I'm trying to make sense of migrant journeys, the railway station is quite far off. So it's almost to keep the migrant workers, it's almost with this thing that, the workers can come and go, right? On one hand, there is always an encouragement, particularly in the mobility studies, that migrant workers can conveniently come and go. They can return, they have to return, right? At the same time, the cities, and this kind of sows the workings of mistrust that is already there, right? So when the pandemic happens, we clearly see that, the migrant workers, even after the announcement that, of the lockdown, the migrant workers clearly started walking back. And I think it's been 5 years since that picture that, that took over the public media. But I think it's important to kind of reflect on that and really ask ourselves, how did, we as what failed the migrant workers? What failed the migrant workers is clearly the same sort of ethics that, Debashri argues with the case of, what happened in the 2022 floods and who gets accused, right? Now, when we really think about this particular case, these cases really probed me to think that how do we really think about trust? I don't have answers. What I'm going to do is set forth a series of propositions. Can we think of trust without really looking at mistrust and the workings of mistrust? One of the bedrocks of workings of the mistrust is definitely, it definitely comes from lack of protection mechanisms. I think this is a literature that all of us are familiar with. And I think when we talk about the protection mechanisms, one of the long-standing demands within the protection mechanisms of the trust has been legal claims. But apart from legal claims and counterclaims, how do we really think about workings of mistrust in the making of a community, right? This is because without trust, a community cannot be formed. And this, the fragments and the ruptures of pandemic clearly kind of showed that, that the community was not formed, and this is where the mistrust kind of begins. At the same time, when we really think about the workings of mistrust, along with legal claims and counterclaims, this is where, I think where does the possibility lie? I think one of the workings of the mistrust really comes with the right, when we really think about the legal protection mechanisms, one of the workings of mistrust beyond the legal protectionisms actually kind of comes from how do we really recognize the rights of across spectrums. And in this recognition of rights across spectrums, I think the second workings of mistrust can be really felt in the politics of recognition. And this we cannot not take into account without taking into consideration the politics of identity and identification documents that has shaped the workings of mistrust, right? It is when we really look at, and this is globally, depending on geographies, it could be very different, right? But even when an epidemiological crisis happens, when a climate disaster happens, it is a certain sort of an identification document that really matters. Why am I laying emphasis on identification documents? In the summer, this is 2-3 years ago, there was a major train clash. 3 trains collided. Three trains collided in Orissa, and I was about to take the return journey. One of the fears that the migrant workers had during those journey, and as I was preparing for this lecture, when I was going through those interview transcripts, one of the fears they all had was that many of their names of, many of their spellings were either misspelled or they had mistakes, and they were really worried that whether those spelling mistakes would actually translate in, not will if there's a crisis that unfolds, will they not be recognized, right? Now this, and when we talk about the politics of identification documents, because it is very telling to say that when that crisis unfolded, when that accident unfolded, what happened was that the mobile number phones were tracked down to really recognize how many people had died, that because many migrant workers during this long distance train journeys, they buy ticket on the spot, which means that many of their names go unaccounted, right? So when we really think about the responsibility to protect, what are the states telling us? The states are telling us that without identification and as the securitization of borders, etc., and this is something these debates are largely out there. With securitization of borders, there is also an emphasis on various layers of identity and identification documents that are actually coming about. Within this identification documents, do we see another sort of layering of the mistrust, right? So, and here, if we really look at the history of identification documents, the history of identification documents globally, including India, has always been cut off around a certain year and date, right? And this has plagued many of the citizenship debates. And at the same time, the politics of identification remains extremely crucial for anyone to apply for a rehabilitation package. In the case of partition, it was the border slip, right? So many families, and CRG's own literature shows that many families, would preserve the border slip, for years. At the same time, there's a brilliant report that Calcutta Research Group published on internally displaced persons, which is called the report on voices. And this extensive survey that was taken across various geographies for this report on voices clearly kind of is showing, and it is primarily this voices report that made me really think that, when we think about responsibility to care and protect, the care and protect, one part is, how do we make the state accountable? But when this crisis strikes, is there also a loss of faith within the community, across the community, and what is happening to intra-community dynamics, right? And the Voices report, I think, is quite seminal to really push us to think about. There are various sort of, case study, there are various sort of geographies that this report is bringing together. But I think when you really look at this report, what this report is also kind of, I think, pushing us to think is, how do we really think about the workings of trust as if a community is in making, right? Is there a sort of loss of a sense of community when a crisis like this, when crisis like this hits, right? It could be riots, it could be conflict, it could be development-induced displacement. But what goes on in making the rebuilding of a community? And in rebuilding of the community, and it takes years, as CRG's research, particularly on Hirakud Dam displaces, Bhakra Nangal displaces, clearly shows. These are all the articles that are there in Refugee Watch. They clearly kind of show that, it takes years to actually kind of build a livelihood. Trust comes much later, right? So, at the end of when we really think about this workings of, how do we kind of bring trust at the center, there is a way in which, we also need to think about. So for workings of trust, because I foregrounded the workings of mistrust, for workings of trust, therefore, what becomes important? Building from Debashree's work and the Voices report, I think at the heart of it requires a recognition of difference. Without recognition of difference, of ethnicity, of caste, tribe, gender, and really understanding community at its intersectionality, I think trust doesn't develop. Trust happens with recognition of difference, and recognition of difference is a first step towards really kind of acknowledging possibilities of the limits of reciprocity, right? Because trust is built on the idea of reciprocity, but reciprocity cannot be equal. And it's time we push the literature on the trust to also think about unequal reciprocities. Do unequal reciprocities create, because the literature on particularly the literature on flood affected areas, coming up with and here I'm talking about Cultivating Aid by by Scott and others. You really kind of see this also kind of creates a sort of a discourse of who is a beneficiary, like who is a beneficiary, right? And moment you reduce a community to a beneficiary, that's where I think that is one sort of a limitation that also comes particularly around the ideas of making of a community. So how do we really think about these terminologies that have come about with ideas of responsibilities to protect, and particularly for care and protection, right? Because when we reduce communities to beneficiaries, we also end up obliterating. Many a times we have also obliterated the difference along the lines of ethnicity, along the lines of gender, along the lines of caste, definitely in the context of India and race. So I still have 8 minutes to go, or 10 minutes. Sorry, I'm just taking the time because
you can take 10, Ishita.
Oh,
you can
okay,
take 10.
Thanks. So, when we really think about this would be my third proposition. Thanks, Priya, for giving me 10 minutes. When we really think about the third proposition, how do we recognize difference? And this is something, recognition of a difference can only come about if we really, and this is why I began with the voices report, because it is very, very important therefore to return to the voices, right? Returning, empirically speaking, returning to the voices, because responsibility to care and protect cannot come from a top-down approach. And I think various failures of various sort of protection mechanisms clearly kind of show us that a grounded approach is very, very important. Why is a grounded approach important? And here, one of the learnings that I have had, and this were the series of IDP consultation, internally displaced persons consultations that CRG took in 3 geographies within India. And in one of the discussion sessions, it was really pointed out about the density of population. When you really think about a rehabilitation package, the density of population, and here it was one of the criticisms that came about on the National Resettlement and Rehabilitation Policy, was the number that got earmarked to be counted as a settlement, right? Now, when you really think about quantification of a settlement around numbers, it would be very different in the length and breadth of a single country, right? And this is where I think when we think about that, how do we really think about recognition of difference? Recognition of difference has to be a grounded material approach, and here an embedded understanding of geography really becomes important. To tie my 2 points together, that where I said that trust, like workings of mistrust, is where we really see the failure of making of a community, or necessary steps for rebuilding a community. And the second, what I was trying to propose is that how do we end up recognizing difference? Do recognition of difference recognition of differences don't die down, particularly when we really think about differences don't die away, or when disasters happen, rather differences get amplified. And how do we really think about really working through those differences? tying these two together, why am I saying, trust is at the heart of responsibility to care and protect? Because trust is both, and this would require a separate discussion. But let me just leave with this thought that trust is not, it's very difficult to actually arrive at a collective trust. While individual to individual trust is something that there are various sorts of models, but when we really think about collective trust, if you really look at the quote unquote, I'm calling it the mohalla committees. These were these neighborhood committees that were set up particularly in riot affected areas in certain parts of India, but it took years for these committees to really come together, which means that workings of trust actually goes back to efforts of collectivization. And this collectivization efforts, wherever it has been successful, it has clearly been this role of the civil society. This begs us a question: where does it leave the state? And I will stop here.
You're very well within your time limit, Ishita. Thank you so much. And I'm sure there are going to be multiple questions for you, so I will not take anybody's time. Kindly ask your questions. We have around 30 minutes with us. Please go ahead and ask whatever you have to ask. You could leave the question in the chat box or you could raise your hands. Please go ahead. Yes, please, Joanna.
Yes, thank you so much for that presentation. That was amazing. I'm doing research on disaster communities in the impact of disasters on fishing communities in the Philippines, and I also noticed the strong role of civil society, and I was very curious for one of your initial comments. You were talking about how you saw, the layouts of the trains, the buses, and all of that, and how that impacted, the perception of migrant communities or the relationship of the state. I was just wondering, did you verify that, or was that something that you observed? Yeah, just curious how you came to that conclusion. Thank you.
This was based primarily on my ongoing fieldwork, where I am following the migrant journeys from one of the eastern states of India to the city of dreams in Mumbai. The long distance trains that arrive in the city of Mumbai and the station is quite far away from the central parts where the migrants go for work, right? And I think, if we really look at the spatial arrangement of the bus stations, the railway stations today globally, one of the logic around organization of infrastructure is to decongest. Decongestion has always been very central to urban studies, right? So there's this beautiful book by Avadhendra Sharan, which talks about the city of Delhi, and he repeatedly is showing that how, there was in the planning of Delhi, right? In the planning of Delhi, there was constantly this debate that was happening of how do we need the migrants for the service of the city, right? But we do not have housing problem, right? So when we really think about the infrastructure of bus stations, like the connectivity, right? It's very important to really understand that in connection with the housing. This is what, historian Havadendra Sharan is showing in his book on decongestion, and the politics of, how the walled city kind of gets organized in the city of Delhi. In the case of, Bombay, what I have been witnessing is that when the migrant workers, they really access the railway stations which are at the peripheries so that they can quickly arrive within the city through other railway networks, right? So, but, this also adds up to their cost of travel. Right? If a train station really gives me at the center of my place of work, so which will be for the urban planners, it will be last mile connectivity problem, but it's not a last mile connectivity problem, right? It is much more a problem with the intention of who do you keep away, right? At the same time, you may also ask, but this is the same thing happening to the airports as well, right? The airports are getting further and further away from the city, right? And all of this with the intent of decongestion. But decongestion from what, from whom, is a question to ask, I think.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
If I may just add one line, Ishita, decongestion also brings in the question of how do we define congestion? Whose presence makes it congested rather than, how many people make it congested. It's like what kind of people make it congested. For example, in the city of London, even 5 people going to a football match makes it congested. So, so there are all these markers where certain groups make a city congested, whereas others are tolerated.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I think, and I think you're absolutely right. Now that you ask this, you make this comment, thank you, Professor Banerjee, for making this comment, because if you really think about the trains that come to the city of Calcutta, it's only when the domestic workers are traveling in the city in those particular train hours and routes, then it is thought about as congested. So this is something to really think through, that whose presence makes it congested and how congestion is also perceived within urban planning, right? So thank you for that comment. I'll include it.
While we wait for more questions, Ishita, if there's something that you want to share, I just had one little, observation. A lot of readings that, I've been looking at, and thank you for your wonderful presentation. It takes the pandemic as a kind of rupture, and we've been discussing concepts, of trust, of community, we've always been doing that. And I recently saw Homebound, and I'm sure there were movies of the same nature, before the pandemic as well. Now, in terms of, because you do the reading much more than I do on urban studies, what is this, a sort of shift in focus in terms of, the writings, and how is the new normal, or how have, have we really gone back to, before the pandemic? What has been the subtle change, if at all, in terms of, writings on this space post-pandemic, or, we've lost interest in the pandemic? Is that so?
I think it's a very good question to ponder upon, and I think this is why the second reading that I shared, it was primarily with this intent that that there are repercussions of the pandemic that we clearly kind of see, right? I mean, the migrant workers, don't trust the city anymore, in the same way they would have done it, years ago. When I'm doing the interviews from 2022 to 2023, Priya, repeatedly, the pandemic becomes part of the conversation, that, we took this train, that train. And I think in my, at least, in when we are doing field work, this is clearly evident. At the same time, I think scholars who are working on urban studies, they have also, there is a sort of, paying attention to the infrastructural shifts in connection with the diseases, right? And I think there is a lot more engagement with really the micropolitics of infrastructure, that what does infrastructure actually do to the lives of the people, right? And so infrastructure is not looked upon as this big thing, right? But at the same time, there is a sort of a push to really think about how do we really understand the meaning of this infrastructure, given that, none of this infrastructure was of any use, particularly, for this thing. So in the literature on infrastructure, Priya, we clearly kind of see, the pandemic, not the reflections of the pandemic doesn't disappear.
Thank you so much, Ishita. And we have a deluge of questions, and thank God for that.
I think Colin first I think first Colin will be Colin, and then Munaza, and then the last one will be Shahriar. So in the chat box, Colin is asking, how do you see the role of urban planning play in fostering trust within migrant communities and original residents? Are there any case studies you can share? Thank you so much, Dr. Ishita. It's so insightful.
the role of urban planning in fostering trust between migrant communities. And yes, there are some beautiful studies, that has come about. Like there's this one, and I'll share this with my friends in at Calcutta Research Group so that it can be forwarded. There's this beautiful edited volume on who are the middlemen in the city of Bombay, right? And I think that really kind of shows that, when we think about urban planning, there are sort of this middlemen, like who are the brokers, right? Who are the brokers in the city? And I think particularly, and without this role of the brokers, and you will be amazed, Colin, to really kind of see the range of professions that really come under this umbrella term, brokers, by Borkman. I think it's the book is edited by Borkman. I may be mistaken, but I'll share the reference. That's one work I can immediately think about. There is another work which came about right after right after 1992, the riots, which actually engaged with the Mohalla committees that came up in Bombay by the residents themselves, right? And I think Bombay also becomes a very, very interesting, and why I am returning to the city of Bombay, because if you really look at historically in both this, books, they are also dealing with, because much of the debate in political scenario within Bombay has always been sons of the soil, right? Who is the son of the soil, and therefore the presence of this Mohalla committees or, these brokers in trying to bring some sanity to this chaos really becomes an interesting. So I will share these two that come to my mind. But thank you. This thing also within cities, right? But these are all civil society initiatives or collectives that have taken place. There are these peace efforts that constantly go about, or peace initiatives, that have come about. But as far as the role of the state is concerned, I have to really struggle to find readings. Let me see. Should we move to the next questions?
Yes, please. I think Munaza.
Yeah, so I won't say mine is a proper question. It's just something that you made me think about. I'm thinking about these water-based community in Srinagar who during crisis where like floods and all were left alone. But the thing is, we're also talking about Kashmir. We're also talking about a community who is considered to be socially of the lower caste, but without any, documented or studied correlation between their social status and the social status or their position in urban planning, or just, but still they're existing a constant peripherization, marginalization, displacement, even though they are the residents of the city, yet this city is itself precarious. I mean, it's Kashmir. So I'm just thinking about when we think about this convergence with the rights of people with the motivations of state, I'm thinking about what the motivations are to like facilitate displacement or not facilitate displacement, especially when there exists so much precarity. I don't know if I made sense, but this is something that I'm constantly thinking of, how the motivation of government is, and how there could be any kind of reconciliation between institutions and this kind of ground efforts.
Munaza, as you started, saying the question, in the middle of the question, I was trying to hunt this paper by Sharbani Sharma on the Kashmir floods in this edited volume, Event and Everyday, where I think she's pushing this argument a little further, exactly what you're saying, that when you stop treating, because in much of our planning, and this moments of crisis are seen as one-off events, right? That's where I think it is difficult to find, responses from the state. But at the same time, let me also put together, if you really look at the literature, if you really look at, some of the efforts that came about, like post Cyclone Aila, there were these disaster shelters that were created in Orissa, Bengal, and many other flood prone areas so that, people don't die, right? So, and that's why I meant, Priya, to your question that, I think the question of, like, for instance, do we still have the Shramik special trains, the trains, that carried the migrant workers? Are those trains, ready? Because those trains did come about during the time of pandemic. And I think the question, Munaza, right? That's how you pronounce your name?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Munaza, I think your question is making me think that do we treat these events as one-off, or how do we really understand the repercussion of these events in our everyday life, right? And, Sharbani in her paper clearly is telling that, who actually came together during the floods that happened in Kashmir. It was the everyday people. It was really the people who kind of stood by, right? And that's what I was going back to, that, it's a community that rebuilds itself. I have a little less faith in this word resilience, because I think resilience takes away from the rights. I mean, this is my, and there could be a separate discussion, right? That we often have a lot of faith in the resilience of the community, but resilience is not built in one day. It's built on years of trust. But when you're talking about the people who live on the like, again, you're like Debashree's work, you're also foregrounding that people who are already treated as minorities, right, within that scenario, their experience of within that rebuilding will be very second, right? They will not be the first phase of who gets impacted. They will be the first ones to get impacted, but they will be the last ones to actually kind of have any redressal mechanism. So yeah, I mean, my only this thing is that to stop treating this as just a one-off event, and that's a sad part, like, if you really look at, and I think this is where someone from medical anthropology would be useful, because please understand that, a cholera doesn't get declared as a cholera or an epidemic until and unless, there is a certain quantum of people that actually faces death. Right. So there are these legal ways in which the state is also protecting itself from taking accountability.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we have Shahriar. Could
Okay.
you?
Yes. I want to actually ask, how do you go about ensuring trust? Because sometimes, for instance, the people or the body or the organization that want to trust themselves don't know, but they pretend that they know everything. And this, I think, this is was the realization during the pandemic. I think none of the governments, including the most developed countries in the world, actually knew how to go about it. They gave instructions, then they reversed them, and they just didn't know. So, for instance, masks, saying put on masks, you don't have to put on masks. Then the social distancing regarding the medicine, the people took those medicines, and then there are people who didn't take those medicines. Nothing happened. So, how do you go about ensuring trust from the people, that they're supposed to trust, but they themselves do not?
Absolutely. And this is one part I was struggling, so I kept it out of the lecture. Okay. Thanks. But, for this question, it will actually help me to flesh it out. One of the ways in which, trust also works, and this is something that we can learn from the right to information literature, trust doesn't work without information. And one of the things that we have seen in the recent times is that much of the misinformation around the news of health, right? And this is where, I think this is, I wouldn't say role of media, rather than, and very specifically, I'm using the word information, not media here. That I think trust really happens when information gets exchanged, right? Why? Because when you exchange an information, are you taking responsibility of that information? Because, and you're absolutely right that, initially we were told that it's not an airborne disease, right? Then suddenly, we were told that all of us are supposed to wear masks, right? There were all this, there were all this information, but did any information that was told to us before, was there any responsibility taken that, well, this could have been a misinformation? We were told that, as the events are unfolding, we are sharing with you updates, right? And I think this is where this is a very, very important thing to that, how do we really think about workings of trust without thinking through how information is getting exchanged, who is in control of that information? That is also important, right? Because the states are in control of that information, and this is where I think trust cannot work, or workings of trust cannot really work when we really think about the censorship that was put in place, right? And particularly digital censorship I'm talking about. Does that answer your question? I think I heard the...
Yes, in a way. Thank you.
Okay, okay. I'm just trying to read the question in the chat box and I'll just respond. If a city decides, I think this is a very, very good question. If a city decides to segregate as part of its physical design, how do we overcome the ideology of this space to work towards community? And I think this is where really, if you really see the, like today, how some of the new sort of civil society initiatives they are trying to introduce the idea of the community is really by physically, taking a sort of a physical claim to a space, through various sorts of, exercises that, civil society initiatives are taking, that, let's walk around, let's actually, sensorially map the city instead of, what has been given to us. But when I think about the community, I really think about the ideas of a community as a community always in its making. Community for me personally, the literature that I come from, when we really think about, it is about more about being in common, right? Community as something that being in common rather than commonalities that end up defining a community. When we really think about community as a being in common, we have to take into account the differences that also end up shaping this making of a community. How do we overcome the ideology of this spatial differentiation? I think it can only be done in a very material sense by claiming the spaces. This would be my response.
We still have time for a few more questions. So if there are questions, I'm sure Ishita would like to engage with them.
Ishita, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you. This is just in the mode of conversation, but I want to bring this lecture that you are delivering with your other work, which has to do with labor. So Shumandro Banerjee, in his epoch-making book called Parlor and the Streets, talks about how, working class has a specific role in the formation of streets. So, from there on, if we look at Rito Jyoti's book, and again, the class dimensions of mobility and streets, has the pandemic substantially changed the character of the streets in South and Southeast Asia, or in South Asia?
From the it's a challenging question. I think what the streets got, I think what the pandemic showed us was what Ritajyati's book, Shumanta Banerjee's book, they're showing that, streets as a site of collective action and mobilization. But at the same time, I think I would go back to this proposition that, we had, that Giorgio and I had proposed with the special economic zone, streets really become the corridors during pandemic. Streets really become points of transit, right? And in this points of transit, the streets, really get, particularly post pandemic, I think there is a sort of also ways in which, we can look at the street as really transit points. And if we, because from one hand, the working class really kind of use the street, in very materially speaking, to make a move out, right, from the city. And this is where, I would say the cities become the corridors from the city, and once again, it widens the rural urban distinction for me. This is how I read the pandemic, that if we really look at the return, right, of the migrant workers, and then, when we really look at the ways in which the migrant workers were brought back to the cities, so that the cities could again rebuild itself after the pandemic, you clearly kind of see, how the migrant workers again become part of this corridor economy beyond actually, the zoning technologies of, SEZ, EPZ, etc. So for me, it really acts as a corridor. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
We still have time for a few more questions. Any comments, questions? I think there are, there are requests for more readings, Ishita.
Yes.
So
yes.
maybe, you could basically help them with that.
Yes. The lecture left me thinking, how our burdens and risk of recovery distributed within a community along different social hierarchies. For instance, who were the sanitary workers during Fukushima? Actually, Adriana Riche's work, I think ethnography on the nuclear disaster, she kind of, shows this. Reports the claimed retired mine workers who does the work of, I think once again, we are also asking this question that in the name of resilience, who does that labor to be resilient? I think Emilio's comment really kind of shows us. And thank you, Shamata, for sharing the CRG film on the city as corridor, city of transit.
Talking of resilience, actually, I think in certain ways I am I'm extremely in sync with what you're saying, Ishita, because the thing is, who really talks about resilience? If one looks at, the discourse on resilience, it's largely by, multinational organizations such as the UN and UN supported organizations and the state, because what happens is that when you talk about resilience, you actually absolve the right giving, or, for example, the authority that is supposed to empower you. You sort of take that away, that duty away from them, and place it on the individual. And make it, something that people have to become, being and becoming. So you have to be resilient. You have to become resilient. And, the discourse goes around the fact that nobody else can make you resilient. And it's your inner strength. God alone knows what that is. When you're starving, when you cannot work, when you have a pandemic, how you can be resilient, But the discourse dominates the international grant giving authorities today, when progressively grant money is getting depleted so and more intensely. That is why the whole discourse on resilience is being built, at least according to me.
Yeah,
I'm very
no, no,
yeah.
absolutely right. Actually, Professor Banerjee, because the recent, I mean, one of the PhD students working under me, he was showing me how many of the projects, in the name of climate change, to address salinity basically, and to access safe drinking water, is using this language climate resilient. Now, I'm like, now when you really think about resilient is almost, kind of tells us that one is, you're absolutely right, of the shifting of the burden to the individual. Also, the second is lack of complete accountability, right? So I transfer it on the individual. It's the individual's burden. And then this individual's burden could also become the collective burden, and it could be also be used for blame gaming. Deboshri study is clearly showing that, right? Now, when we really think about the word resilience, I often wonder, and I think now here I hope I'm not overshooting. Like, when we really think about resilience, do we also, I mean, how do protection mechanisms, acknowledge vulnerabilities? Can vulnerabilities and resilience go hand in hand? That is something I'm often left wondering. In the spirit of conversation, I think, because resilience can't go with vulnerabilities. Because resilience immediately states that, you have to be resilient. Therefore, my vulnerability gets completely erased in that discourse. Yeah, absolutely right. I'm completely with you on this.
Thank you so much, Ishita. This was very interesting. And yeah, and if we don't have any more questions, I guess we can go on to the next lecture. But before that, I will request Sifa to introduce our speaker who's here with us today, to introduce him again. And one more thing, this is for the people, the participants who are attending. Please understand that unless you come for the or join 80% of the lectures, we will not be able to issue certificates for you. So please make sure that you are attending 80% of your lectures. After all, you're paying for it. So you might as well attend it, especially because we have lined up such wonderful lectures for you. So, not just lectures, but also interactions. So, having said that, I'll pass the onus of speaking to Sifa or Priya.
Sifa will be introducing Dr. Pal once again. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Pal. Over to you, Sifa.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Paula and Ma'am Priya. So I would like to introduce our second speaker. Dr. Indrajit Paul is Associate Professor and Chair of the Disaster Preparedness, Mitigation and Management Program at the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand. Earlier, he served at the Lal Bahadur Sastri National Academy of Administration, Mussoorie, training Indian Administrative Service officers. With over 21 years of experience, his works bridge research, policy, and practice in disaster risk governance, resilience, and capacity building. He has authored 15 books and over 100 scholarly articles. So we have another wonderful speakers that joining with us. So over to you, Dr. Paul, and welcome.
Thank you, Saifa. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, so I'll share the screen. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Paula and the team to invite me to interact with this group. I'm really honored for this. So let me share some of the experience. So I'll be covering some of the aspect of like how the climate hazards and the disaster in the Southeast Asian region impacting different level of community, and how especially the most vulnerable populations are dealing with that. And in the end, maybe I'll quote one particular case study on Bangkok. So then it'll be more connected with your background, and we'll keep some time for the Q&A towards the end. So this is my background. Like, I'm also affiliated with the Chulalongkorn University Social Science Social Research Institute. primarily my research area is focusing on the community-based disaster risk management and the governance. I was also working with the administrative service, as I've mentioned. So these are the few projects. I'll quote some of the projects in during the discussion. And my research area and my department research area possibly moves around or more or less in this direction: climate hazards, multi-hazard vulnerability risk assessment, especially flood and drought, and disaster governance, policy and risk management, and remote sensing or GIS application on that. So today, actually, I'm going to discuss a few key areas like regional focus and is rational. So I'll start with the Asia Pacific region and South and Southeast Asia, which is also exposed to high level of different type of hazards. So primarily I'll consider like climatic hazards. So let's start with how we can define the community who actually needs the most care, and how it is shaping up over the years in the region. So when I'm talking about the region, maybe some of the experience from South Asia and Southeast Asia I have quoted in consecutive slides. So the structurally, when some disaster situation occurred, then immediately we need some emergency shelter for the impacted community. So that's for a few days. So that depends on the size and scale of the disaster, obviously, and depends on the type of the disaster also. The shelter also defined. So, for example, if it's a flood disasters, then we need to have some constructed building. Primarily we are using in India and Pakistan and Nepal and some of the places in South Asian region, we are using school building as a general concept of a shelter. But in case of Nepal, we have seen during the earthquake, it was also a vulnerable entity or infrastructure, so people also sheltered in the open space. So it depends on the type of the disaster, shelter design and types also changes. So when we talk about the community care, it includes health support, shelter management, and psychological assistance, physio-psychological, socio-psychological assistance. So this particular aspect, so I'm not sure how many of you gone through some disaster or maybe faced some small or big scale disasters. So and maybe we have seen some of the disaster in our neighborhood as well. Neighborhood means some other states, other provinces. So first part is the health support is generally collapsed or maybe overwhelmed. Some of the cases during COVID you have seen, and the shelter management, if it is not organized or not planned early or before the disaster, during the disaster, the management is not actually possible. So 90% of the cases in our South Asian region, shelter management is more or less out of the question. People don't talk about that. And the next part is psychosocial assistance. That is also a very much neglected and maybe less important aspect. People think. Not too much of stress on that we have seen. And these actions also operate before, during, and after disasters. As I mentioned, if we don't plan all these three aspects beforehand, before the disaster, during the disaster, and after the disaster, it's almost not possible to follow. So coming back to the shelter process and the types and the duration. So when we are talking about the disaster, immediate few days, actually we are having need for the emergency shelter. Then we can go for a few weeks, temporary shelter if that disaster situation prolonged. And in due course of time, depends on the size and scale of the disaster. If it is further escalating, or maybe the impact is so high that people actually lost their houses and their houses not livable, then also it can extend. Temporary housing can extend up to 6 months to multiple years. We have seen very strong example from Nepal 2015 earthquake. The whole reconstruction process is not yet completed. It's almost 10 years plus. And until 8 years also the reconstruction process was going on. And then it took a lot of years, depends on the planning, return to the normal situation. So if the country's structure and the social expenditure is on the higher scale, then the back to normalcy is also much faster. So, and that whole process is called the resilience of that particular community or nation or the locality. I mean, the province or state, whatever way we can talk about. So the next part is like defining the mutual protection. When we are talking about the community who are impacted or will be impacted, maybe identified as a high risk community, then the collective action and reciprocal support within the community is very much important. So a point of concern is here, like that includes also sharing resources, helping vulnerable members, and during the crisis and after the crisis also. Most of the communities are often the first responder because external process and external support takes time. Normally, we have seen a very strong example after 2004 tsunami in Tamil Nadu, one of the villages. UNDP actually provided a lot of trainings to the village women for the first aid. And incidentally, like in 2004 December, after 2 or 3 months of their training, so the village group actually trained for the water-related disaster rescue, and they also formed a local level like women group who can also support the first aid. So it was very much helpful during that 2004 tsunami, 2004 December tsunami. We all know about the Indonesia Banda Aceh that tsunami impact. So the fact was like all the neighboring villages was impacted severely, and that particular village actually was impacted less compared to the neighboring villages. And one of the reasons was like the women group was supported or provided training before the disaster, and it was very helpful. They at least saved 30 to 40 lives through the first aid process. So the point of concern is like, or maybe what I would like to emphasize is like mutual and collective action is very much necessary, and it's also actually to build the community resilience. This is one of the major aspects what we need to really build upon. Next part is like climate change as a risk multiplier. So there was a flood and other events was there before. So we are all talk about the climate change, and what exactly climate change is doing. So, I mean, it does not mean like the flood situation, drought situation was not there in the past. It was there, but climate change actually multiplied the impacts, and irregular rainfall, erratic rainfall, all these type of things are happening. So the prediction of the process sometimes getting not that perfect, or maybe so because of that, actually the extreme rainfall situation also increased. Flood and landslide due to the heavy rain also increased. So there are certain things actually which is increased, and that is that climate change actually considered as a risk multiplier. So one of the conditions for the hazard which is actually increasing due to the climate change process. This diagram will give you some broad idea like how the like 2 or 3 different type of ecosystem contributing or maybe impacted through the climate change. First one is the atmospheric process, like changes in the weather pattern. Next one is a glacier melting that also sometimes creating the GLOF or glacial lake outburst flooding, mostly impacted the mountain area. We have seen some of the examples in northern part of India, even in Nepal as well. Impact on the freshwater resources also heavily impacted due to that glacial melting. Third one is the land drought and desertification due to the deforestation. I think drought situation also increasing, and desertification process also intensifying. Urban heat island will be one of the key concern for today's discussion. I will focus one of the specific case study on Bangkok, urban areas, like how the heat, not exactly the heat island, but how the urban heat actually impacting the urban poor, especially the slum dwellers. And the fourth one is the sea level rise that also is actually impacting and continuously impacted the community which are heavily dependent on the ocean system and also living close to the ocean or sea. These are the dominant hazards. Let me explain a little bit difference between I'm mentioning continuously about the hazard, but we are very much familiar with the disaster. So all the time, I mean, most of the time we are talking about the disaster is actually not natural, because natural phenomena what actually is happening is called natural hazards. And if the situation which is creating or providing the process like which that hazard will be impacting more or less, that is actually called disaster, if that escalating the level of thing we can withstand. So all the hazards not necessarily will lead to the disaster. Say for example, I think we all know about 2015 Nepal earthquake. It was very destructive, and so many people died. But we also not very much aware about 2015 Japan earthquake, because Japan earthquake not killed too many people. So the reason is, I mean, the point of discussion here is like earthquake itself is a natural hazard, but earthquake when is impacting several people and losing like a lot of lives and infrastructure and creating economic impacts, that it becomes disaster. So all the hazards not necessarily become disaster. So in the South Asian region, actually, 5 hazards primarily causing 95% of the direct disaster losses. This loss actually signifies primarily on the infrastructure loss I'm talking about here. So if we see the geospatial distribution of the natural and man-made disasters, which already caused some level of impact, from 1900 to 2024, it's a very long period. So you can see like the number in Asia of the total disasters are much higher than any other continents. So in terms of the natural hazards and the man-made disasters, both are having very high number compared to other areas. This also will provide you some understanding and the trend. One data is showing 2004 to 2023 annual average, and the one data is 2024 only 1 year data. So if you see the flood here, so average annual flood disaster from 2004 to 2023 is actually 168. And if you see only 2024 is 142, that is actually less than the average number of disaster happened until 23. What does that mean? That means like there are hazards which is having high rainfall, but due to the early warning and people's coping capacity and government's initiative, maybe that all floods are not become that level of disasters. So the number of disasters, number of hazards occurrence might be increasing, but number of disasters might be decreasing. So that trend we can see here. Similarly, there are many other disasters as well, year wise we can see. On the other side, like since the climate change and even the ocean warming also having a strong impact on the storms, especially tropical cyclone, that number is actually increased in 2024 itself is 147 disaster happened due to the storm, and the average number is 106. So this is a distribution based on the continent on the top 10 countries in 2024. There's a recent data. So we can see like all the countries here in altogether is 167 in the entire Asia. Out of that, like India and Thailand and Philippines, Indonesia, we have very high number, especially Indonesia and Philippines. China by geographic size is quite big. Similarly, Indonesia and Philippines having a very big number on the disasters. Extreme rainfall to leading to the flood and landslide, I mean, that is very much evitable. Water-related hazards are primarily causing 50% of the all disasters. What is happening in the region? So this diagram actually will be useful who are interested to do the research on this, like to understand the impact. So maybe for them it will be very useful. Like we can categorize one particular disaster types. So one we are considering here the natural hazards only, natural hazards and that associated disasters. So we can choose one of the particular type of the disaster, and then under that maybe subtypes, because if we categorize like flood, for example, there are riverine flood, there are like flash flood, coastal flood, even some also called urban flooding. So there are different categorization, and impact of that floods are also very, very different. So in general, it's called flood characterizations or hazard characterization. How to characterize that? That assessment process itself actually providing some good insight of the impact process as well. So this is the projected like number of the population, how like population dependency on the impact of the disaster, because there are three components of the risk assessment. One of the major component is actually the population density and also the distribution as well. I mean, so that density of the population geographically will provide the exposure, and then exposure actually is creating a very significant role for deciding the risk of the particular location for a particular hazards. So I think most of us are very much aware about like any disasters, whether it's a flood or cyclone or other, like especially I mean heat waves or any other types. Its primary impact also is happening to the children, because in the risk categorization also one of the major component is called the sensitivity. Sensitivity is also defined by the age group, because some of the age groups are very much vulnerable for certain things. So first one, we can see like the climatic extremes also intensify the social and educational disruption. We have seen educational disruption and especially the school closure, a significant level in South Asian region. And top on that, like after the closure also, like schools are primarily used for the shelter. And due to that, more or less 50% of the school days are impacted on the particular academic year. So similarly for the heat waves, maybe not the closure of the schools, but the daily life. I think we have seen in several times due to the heavy high temperature and heat waves, maybe schools are closed for a couple of days. Governments and schools are also declared. So we have seen this incident in India a couple of times. Similarly, as I mentioned, like the age is creating one of the major factors to decide the level of the risk of the particular community. So elderly population also extremely vulnerable, especially for the heat waves. I'll show you some of the statistical detail for Bangkok slum population after some slides. And climate change is actually increasing the frequency and the intensity of the heat related hazards. Especially like when we are talking about like the vulnerable populations, three or four primary categories rather are falls under that block. One is young children. Second is like elderly people, and the third one most vulnerable are the disabled persons. And depends on the country, depends on the economy. I think people are also creating the infrastructure which is like compatible with the disabled persons. I think in every country is not following equally. So when the disaster occur, like we have to also set the priority who will be like provided most priority for the relief and I mean rescue operation as well. So the large scale displacement when it is happening for certain disasters, we have seen some of the cyclone related early warning very recently in Orissa, like a couple of years back, and a large scale displacement, temporary displacement for some almost 200,000 people displaced for a short period of time and also evacuated actually. So that is also categorized under the short level or short term displacement. So that disruption when happened, like we need to categorize the disabled persons, but maybe unfortunately we didn't have very categorized or clustered data on that. So community are the first group or the first responder who actually know who are the disabled person in their locality. So I think that like mutual support is very much required, as I mentioned at the early stage of this today's discussion. Vulnerability is also shaped by the exposure and the mobility limitations. So that I mentioned, like, depends on the infrastructure options. Like we also need to keep that particular like disabled friendly infrastructure, even the vehicle as well. There are a couple of examples maybe I'll quote for some better understanding. So if we quote like 2011 floods in Kerala, which is located in southern part of India. Extreme rainfall caused severe flooding. These are mostly rain-induced flood. Large-scale displacement also happened, and obviously there's a huge amount of livelihood losses. So what happened to the community-led actions, which includes actually local fishermen and the volunteers, which conducted, they actually volunteered for the boat and rescue operation also supported. Community-run shelters and coordinated food, especially the community kitchen and healthcare. And the digital platform also enables citizen authority for the coordination. But one part actually we need to also understand, when we'll do the community run or mutually supported activities, it is not very much coordinated. So locally maybe it will be coordinated some extent, but it's very difficult during that time if they're not practiced or not like governed by some process or structure. It is very much difficult to follow a particular coordination, and the authority who are actually responsible to support that community may be not aware about what is going on actually on the ground. So I think the community run process also to be coordinated with the local authority as well. Next, we have one example in 2022 floods. I think many of us are aware about that in Pakistan. So that also displaced a large number of people. There was also a failure of communication between the provinces from the upstream areas to downstream areas. So this catastrophic flooding actually displaced millions of people, and formal relief and health system also overburdened or overwhelmed, and actually people suffered a lot on that. So especially like community related relied on the informal support network because government system was failed temporarily. That also includes like the shelter, as I mentioned in the case of Kerala, almost like similar community supported shelters and the food distribution, and women, children, and elderly people support also provided from the community itself. So the mutual protection, what is the discussion point today, is that practice sustain basic needs. But as I mentioned, like if it is not properly done, it might be a catastrophic because it is not coordinated well with the local government's action. So if we see the cyclones in South and Southeast Asia, as I showed in the previous graph, like Philippines and Indonesia, especially Philippines, they're also having a large number of disasters, especially the related to the cyclonic storm. And the reason for this actually is mentioned here. Maybe we can go to the next detail of what exactly is happening on the cyclone. So it's improved early warning system in the country like India and Bangladesh also happened for last, I think, 10 to 15 years. So improvement of the early warning system, especially the dissemination of the information, at least 4 to 5 days before to the community was already placed in a very systematic way. I think all of us who are aware about like east coast of India, I think you might be knowing like 5 to 6 days before Indian Meteorological Department is issuing the notification about the cyclonic storms, and most of the government on the coastal line are actually well prepared on that. Especially we have seen very strong preparation and preparedness in Orissa. The second part, however, the economic loss continues to rise because of the infrastructure. So that is actually I am doing some projects on that, how to make a climate resilient infrastructure, including which includes the community. Maybe today's discussion I have not incorporated that part, but maybe in some other occasion we'll discuss. So infrastructure, actually there is a we have to understand like low income economy and low income country as per the World Bank, and middle income countries. So low and middle income countries having relatively low number of infrastructure. So there is a need of the infrastructure construction. So that is going on. At the same time, the population density is also very high. So when a similar type of disaster occurred in high income country and low income country, infrastructure loss in terms of the dollar value is much higher in high income country because they have already constructed the infrastructure. That's why it's high income country. And the low income country having low infrastructure, but is very much important because the country and the locality is relying on that available infrastructure. So due to that gap of the finance and the gap of the funding, sometimes infrastructure is not adequately address the local possible vulnerable situations, and maybe not constructed considering the resilience aspect of that particular locality. So infrastructure got damaged easily, and that damage also having a long-term impact, especially housing and the roads and energy infrastructure. And many of the infrastructure also having a linkage with the livelihood, especially if you go with the market chain or the like a supply chain issue, then you produce your agriculture products, but it will not go to the market because road is damaged due to the flood. So these are the few points maybe for the disruption on the education can be pointed out, but maybe there are more example. Like we are aware about cyclone Amphan during 2020. It was hit actually in the bordering area of Bangladesh and India both, and Kolkata was impacted severely. There was many areas which was out of the electricity or almost blackout for a couple of days, in some cases more than a week. And that was also like a very, I mean, overlapping with the COVID time. So that was a very critical, like we call dual disaster happened, and it was really impacted the city community, especially the urban areas. Community preparedness during that time was uh, one of the areas which was playing a significant role. Early warning system played a role, but it was not very much effective because people could not follow due to several obligations due to COVID situation. We have another example from Philippines, like 2013 Typhoon Haiyan. This is one of the devastating and most impacted tropical cyclone or typhoon happened in recent days in Philippines. So that actually, if we see the community recovery process, Typhoon Haiyan caused extreme loss of life and the livelihoods, which is also overwhelmed the formal emergency response. Philippines in general, like there are a good early warning system, and the community is also very much aware about the different type of disasters, and also following some extent about the early warning information and notification as well. So in this case, actually, it was way beyond their expectations. So local community also organized collective rescue, shared shelter, and also community kitchen, as we have seen in the case of Kerala as well. A strong social network supported the collective rebuilding. The last point, actually, we have to really emphasize on the social network, and this part actually playing a significant role. I have seen some cases in Myanmar. I have seen some cases in Nepal, and also we have seen like in Philippines as well. So there are many example you can see like where social network is actually playing a very strong role for the rebuilding process. Now we already discussed a couple of points on Nepal earthquake 2015, where community response having a multiple example from Nepal we can quote. One is immediate recovery and the mutual support during the recovery process, and most importantly the business recovery. So as we know, like Nepal having a large amount of funding coming from like the people who are outside, so from the remittance from the outside country. So actually, the small and medium enterprises or the businesses were supported by the local government, but it was too time taking. Like it was taking like almost 1 year, 2 years to get some of the initial fund to restart their business. So during that time, that informal social support was playing a very significant role, and relatives and friends actually supported their business, and most of the business restarted through the money they have received from the this social network. Flood, storm, and displacement having a lot of examples we have seen, but today for discussion purpose I put like 2 or 3 examples from India, Pakistan, Philippines, and Nepal. Repeated displacements also undermine livelihood, education, and long-term displacement, the long-term development. So I think like short-term displacement still okay, like for a week, for a couple of days, but when it comes to the long-term or multiple time displacement, the education of the children and the livelihood of the people are also significantly impacted. So that actually leads to the impact to the long-term development as well. According to the UNDRR Global Assessment Report 25 recently published, Bangladesh is among the world's most disaster-exposed countries, with millions of people at risk from the flooding and the storm every year. So there are also report in, I mean, we have seen in 2023 possibly. So these reports are actually freely available. If you type Global Assessment Report, in short, is called GAR. There are very good report came up in 2015. There are at least 4 different theoretical perspective mentioned in that report. One of the component was in that how social expenditure is playing a significant role for the reconstruction and rebuilding process. High population density, low-lying terrain, and the poverty increases the vulnerability. That is one of the key aspect. Now coming back to one of the key concern of the heat, urban heat, especially rising heat as an emerging disaster risk in South and Southeast Asia. I think most of the government, local government, especially the urban municipalities, are very much concerned and trying to take a lot of actions. Though, I mean, we are staying in Thailand, so Thailand is also having 3 seasons: hot, hotter, and hottest. There is nothing called like cold time. So we have seen like from the municipal government, there are a lot of steps they are taking for minimize the at least some heat and also even pollution as well. So heat wave impact in 24 includes like approximately 33 million people affected in Bangladesh. Around 700 heat related deaths happened in India, and 568 deaths in Pakistan. So the number is quite significant and very high actually. If you see, I mean that heat-related disaster which is impacted and most of the cases, this the people who are died actually from the urban slum and the people who are actually working outside. So UNESCAP report actually also identifies the major cities which are also under the urban heat risk. Especially we can call like a hotspot of the urban heat. So Delhi, Dhaka, Karachi, Manila, Jakarta, and Phnom Penh in Cambodia are very high risk. If we take a case of Indonesia, which is also experiencing recurring floods and storm and heat stress, particularly also we have seen Jakarta is one of the city which is also identified by the UNESCAP report as one of the city which is impacted by the heat waves, high heat waves. Second part here, like local committees engage in the community-based preparedness, which also include early warning dissemination, evacuation planning, and neighborhood level coordination. Okay. I think all of us present in today's discussion also very much exposed and we can say survived COVID-19. That's why we are here. This was one of the major disaster, like especially like biological disasters happened in recent days. I think almost after 100 years. And COVID-19 exposed systemic weakness across the world. And also it exposed like a gap in the system and especially the like health system. Community network played a crucial role during that time. If we remember like the situation of that time, like community network was one of the major player which was like having a significant role for the survival actually. So when the formal health and social system was really overwhelmed, and there was I mean reason for that, and community in the Asian region actually organized food distribution, care for the elderly people, and the local information sharing. I think there was a completely reverse picture we have seen in the Western countries as well. So there was quite a gap on that care for the elderly people, and especially for the local support and the community level support was missing at the very beginning. Maybe later stage it was revived. Now the question is why community experience matters in case of disaster. So that question maybe we can discuss during the Q&A session, but I would like to highlight few points on that. So disaster increasingly occur with shorter recovery time because we are not getting time to recover, and by the time we recover, before that maybe another disaster comes. So actually it's reducing the community's ability to recover fully. And overlapping and cascading disasters amplify social and health vulnerability. Community level response becomes critical when formal systems are overstretched. We have seen example from at least 3 to 4 countries today. Maybe we can directly go to the example of. So this case study actually was a small research done from AIT. We have tried to assess the household level vulnerability of urban heat. All the houses you are seeing is an actual picture taken by our team during the study from Bangkok. So we really, it's very hard to believe like this type of house in Bangkok, right? So this is the case, it's an informal settlement. These are the location actually, the picture taken. So this area, in the name of the area is Klong Toi. Where we have informal settlement for the study. It's a very short, small study, but I think you'll get a very interesting picture, interesting insight actually from there. So objective of the study was to identify the household level vulnerability of the urban areas for heat hazard or urban heat hazard for the informal settlement. And the second is to examine the influencing factor, which is actually increasing the urban heat effect to that community. And the last part is like trying to do some recommendation for the policy and practice guideline to see like what is right now in practice and what can be done or can be modified. So let's move ahead with this. So some statistical information may be useful for you to understand. So in the slum population, if you see like the female population percentage is more than the male population. So it's like 53% female population and 47% is male population. So we are talking about a very small community, slum community. So we tried to check like some sample household as per the process. Like so, if we see the distribution here and the second table, how many people are using motorbikes, how many people are using go by walk, and distance of the house to the road, and the road is wide enough inside the, I mean near their houses. So all these actually will give you very interesting insight. Like 107 people are accessing their house by walk. That means like the house not accessible by road. If you see the household size and the family household size, in 54% household are having like 1 to 3 family members. and almost 13% of the households having like 7 to 9% in one household. More than half of the household actually in the community had a small size and ranging from 1 to 3 members, as this pie chart actually showing this. Next, actually, due to some limitations, we could not go very deep on the type of disease and also detail about, because there are restriction on the data. We cannot collect very detailed medical history and all this stuff, and sample also for any type of physical sample. So this illness generally we try to capture some aspect like which is not impacting in terms of the process exist here as a rule. So number of families we covered like 31 families here, like having different type of illness. 6 family we got around like heat related illness without hospitalization, and heat related dead from that community was on almost 1% people died due to the heat waves. So overall, if you see the 11% of the population suffered heat related illness and the hospitalization and the death. So if we put together all these numbers, like the number is not very high, but very high and high depends on also the country perspective. Some cases like death of 5 people are actually very serious. Some cases like death of 50 people are also not very serious. So it depends like how we are taking it. So next diagram will provide you one detailed insight about the exposure sensitivity and the capacity, like what type of capacity they have. So this is the formulation actually we used, exposure sensitivity and capacity, to understand the vulnerability of the particular locality. The pictures you see in the inset is actually the actual picture of the slum. As I mentioned, like most of the areas are not accessible by road, by car. So it is the majority of the families are accessing their houses by foot, by walk. Many of them, like if you see like why it is impacting and why the vulnerability is very high. High outdoor capacity of the community. So also it's very much crucial to ensure the proper household level urban heat preparedness plan, because if we see like most of the people are not condition is not indoor living conditions are not very much compatible or not very much good, so people are trying to spend more time on the outside. So these are the sections where actually you can see the contribution of that particular points on the vulnerability. So around 60% of the community, we can see the sensitivity component is actually mild. So if you see the high capacity, so it's around 90% our capacity is high. That means it's a very positive, means like vulnerability is low of that community. If their capacity is very high, then the vulnerability also will be low. Exposure to heat is 99%. So you can see like there are differences between the process. Like 99% people are household are exposed to the heat waves or urban heat waves, but 90% people are having a very high capacity to handle it. So that means like 10% are having moderate capacity and there is zero actually having the low capacity. So what does that mean? That means overall vulnerability are very low in general. So the climate change adaptation practices, we pose some questions. Avoid outdoor activities during daytime. Windows covered with the vegetation cover. Wearing light clothes, hanging wet sheets or blanket or towel on the window, wearing a cap, walking on standing under the shade. So all these are points actually we have tried to ask different households. I think there also we got very interesting insight. So most of the cases we have seen like more than 75% people are avoiding outdoor activities during daytime. and most of the people are staying hydrated, like as per the sample size. So these are the highlighted area, like what are the strength of the community. We're talking about the mutual support and also the community strength. So government provide social welfare support in case of the community living in Bangkok. Easy access to the public transport, hospital, and market. Green and open spaces are also widely available, and in a few minutes walk from their home, they can reach there. Easy to access the street and or road, so they don't need to go very long distance to reach the main road. Water bodies are also available nearby, so that overall temperature not going very high, at least the peak time of the summer. All household access to the electricity and drinking water. So also we have seen like there are a large number of households which are also using air conditions and also having a fan almost in every households, because electricity and drinking water are available in all households. Um, the next maybe important part is natural and mechanical ventilation or shan shades are also available in most of the homes households. Early warning information, because governments are also very proactive, like city governments are also disseminating some information about the temperature, and as well as like heat waves, anything coming up in next 48 hours or more. So people are also prepared accordingly. So these are the influencing factor. Maybe we can go to this one towards the end, more or less. So there are climate change master plan for Thailand, and the area I'm talking about, the Bangkok metropolitan city. So they are also having a separate plan as well. So this climate change plan, master plan, is like 2015 to 2050. So which mention only to develop the risk map of the flood and drought. It should also describe the urban heat and heat waves also, because when it's planned like as a climate change master plan, heat wave and heat wave related things also not considered very significantly or strongly. Drought and flood, drought especially, are not directly impacting the urban population in general, like is impacting the livelihood of the people. Second part is the preparedness action might be varies as per the different type of the hazard. If it not described clearly, so it's also should be mentioned clearly in the master plan. So we have tried to understand like what is the master plan right now exist, and what type of things may be improved or incorporated based on the considering the heat wave as a one of the major hazards in the region. So specific plan for the health emergency also not very much clear, because I think after COVID maybe it should be improved. And for the research purpose, enhanced preparedness health institution also should be encouraged to categorize illness and fatalities based on the climate factors. So I think the categorization of the some of the sickness or illness also to be listed, like these are the category of illness or sickness or health hazards which is coming out of the or directly impacted through the heat waves or floods or air pollution or the cold waves or something like this. So that is not very clear, because if there is a death, it's not sure the death is due to the anything which is related to the climate, because that is not mentioned anywhere. So this climate change plan should emphasize the need to enhance the health infrastructure, both structurally and non-structurally. Non-structurally means like the service support. Community engagement in climate and health related initiative also should be integrated in the healthcare system. So these are the few recommendations out of this small research. I think we also plan for a large scale research on that. So there are housing policies. These are the houses right now you see here in the picture is a low cost housing in Thailand. So this is one of the examples, like to shift some people from the slum to low cost housing. So there are many blocks, actually at least 7 to 8 blocks in different locations in Thailand, in Bangkok area, which is also government supported low cost housing scheme. Um, so we tried to map actually how this particular segments, which is actually we are coming up with the vulnerability assessment indicators, are linked with the Sendai framework, global framework, and also the SDGs. So all these things actually we tried to put into one of the book chapters. Maybe after this session, I will circulate that for your information. So this is the summary. Actually, we observed, like based on the findings of the study, community-based urban heat risk reduction and mitigation plan should be developed in relation to the known vulnerability. That means, as I mentioned, like the climate change plan, master plan, should incorporate certain things like which will cover the heat waves and related impacts. The next here, like one of the major component here, to advocate the high level of authority by referring to the results of that assessment, we should do that maybe in a larger scale. The next part is the Bangkok master plan on the climate change should address excessive heat by enhancing insulation and some of the thermal barrier roof coating, like the way in some of the Western countries they are using for the to protect from the cold waves or the heavy winter. Maybe okay, so I think so this one actually the last slide to discuss. So we are trying to discuss about like how community could support different phases of disaster and how the most vulnerable population also to be supported. So citizen science actually we have seen like is very useful if we see the steps, different steps like start with the different research idea and how the research ideas should be percolated through the community. So they will be in the research process and at the same time implementation process also. So citizen science is one of the very interesting and recent trend also to understand and co-development process can be followed through the citizen science. So this is my last slide. So I'll be happy to respond to any of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pal, for that very, very extensive and informative presentation. We have a couple of questions. In fact, three of them, because there's one on the chat. Do you want me to read that out or?
Yeah, one question I can see very long. Yeah.
It says it's Amelia from Indonesia, I think. She says, thank you for your presentation. As you mentioned disasters in Indonesia before, it reminded me of Sumatra flash flood that happened last year in November. In the case where government support is absent, unresponsive, what is your opinion on donation or crowdfunding? I think there is a dilemma in relying on civil society supports. While we know that it worked in helping the disaster victims, but at the same time, the state is gradually leaving their own citizens to their own device. And this situation keeps happening.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. That's why I tried to mention like 4 or 5 countries, different type of examples. Thank you to raise that. I'm also currently working in 2 or 3 regency, actually, Bandung and some of the other regency on like displacement due to the flood situation. So we observed like we did some field work as well in Indonesia. So I'm very much aware about the fact what you mentioned. But I think there are 2 major components. Like one is we cannot leave complete responsibility to the government, which is also having a lot of pressure on the finance. Maybe that's why we call like low income country and middle income country, as I mentioned, due to the financial constraint. So maybe government, if they want also, maybe they will not be able to support fully. One. Second, as I mentioned, like community are the first responder. Anything happen, they will be the first person who can respond to that financially, any other any types. So they should be responsible. So I think for that, government having one at least some process to prepare themselves how to respond faster. Coming back to your major component, what you mentioned about the donation and or the crowdfunding. So I think there are 2-3 ways already government started. Even the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, SFDRR, also talks about how we can channelize some of the private agency support, which is CSR support or maybe something else. Normally the CSR support. can be provided or can be channelized for. We can call as a donation, and also we can call some other type of support. I'll give you one quick example from Thailand flood 2011. I think most of the people know in Southeast Asia, like Thailand faced a huge flood in 2011. But during the recovery process, private sector also came into action to support. So what they did, like in some of the areas, like some provinces, they took, okay, and that's company X, they'll provide all internet and everything support, or the like school reconstruction. So it was very interesting one. It comes under the CSR support as a donation. It is also relieving their tax, and at the same time they are donating and helping in terms of the money to reconstruct. I think there might be some innovative way we can. So crowdfunding is very easy to saying, but how to do that? That we need to have some innovative ideas like how to do that. And on the donation, I think private sector may play a very significant role.
There's another question there about, state policies, development priorities, and disaster management regimes. How do they shape vulnerability to climate disasters in South and Southeast Asia?
Right. Yeah, thank you. So I think most of the countries in South and Southeast Asia having disaster management plan. And it's not about the national level plan. There are three level of plans. One plan is the national level. Second plan is the provincial level or state level. And the third plan is the local level. So mostly it's a sub provincial level or maybe district level. In case of India, in case of Thailand also, it's a district. So it's a three-tier plan. Involving the development priorities, this plan actually the process is called the mainstreaming of the disaster risk reduction. So when they are developing the plan, maybe the disaster risk reduction component can be embedded into that process. So there is nothing written very strongly. I do agree, like there is nothing written very strongly how to do that. It depends on a case to case basis. There's also reason like why it is not written, because there is not a single process which can be followed. Just quick example, say when you are constructing a road, right? So road having a specific budget for specific length or specific width type of roads. Now, if you follow a disaster management plan and also develop the risk map of the location, we can enhance the height of the road, raise the height of the road to protect the road from the floods. So you don't need a separate disaster management plan. Simply like if we increase 10% of the budget to raise the height of the road up to a certain level where the flood water will not be impacted. So we are actually implementing the DRR, disaster risk reduction, into our development process. And the road is actually protected from the flood. And we can call this a resilient infrastructure also. It's very simple, but now we should embed all this process during the development activities. So some extent it's missing, but as I mentioned, maybe some of the components are coming over time. I have given example of Thailand, like when the plan came, COVID was not there. Even the heat wave also not listed as a climate related disaster. So I think many of the plans we have seen, not only in Thailand and other countries as well, heat waves was not considered in the disaster management plan, in the climate plan also, heat wave related disasters. So I think not all countries are actually, having the same type of approach, but I think there are something we can be added. Primary problem is the implementation actually here.
And we're running short of time, so maybe Dr. Pal could answer
quickly
to the extent possible.
Yeah, sure.
A couple of other questions.
Okay, Bernal, thank you for raising this. I just two things you mentioned. I try to clarify this. One is the road height you mentioned. So road height, what you mentioned is actually not due to the flood situation. Road is actually constructed on a higher elevation. It was a generic, like every time is not road is constructed up on the old one. So that's why like every time the road height is increasing due to the bad planning basically. So it was not maybe required to heighten that road. It was not heightened intentionally. It was heightened by default, like then due to the wrong planning. What I mentioned, like, okay, maybe the location should be surveyed and properly done as per the vulnerability situation, we can develop the road height. Okay, coming back to your displacement on the permanent displacement due to the landslide and erosion, I'll quote you one example from your state like Dhemaji district is one of the area which is also I visited in the 4 or 5 districts actually for flood related issues, especially also erosion as well. So the people who are losing their lands, not only that due to the landslide, also for the erosion especially. Majuli is also one of the specific example as well. So those who are losing their lands, like there are three types. One are like maybe informal settlements are one of the group who are losing their lands. So government should have some planning like how to resettlement policy should be placed, like, and also that area which will be coming under the erosion and also the landslide is also easily can be identified. It's not like all of a sudden some areas got eroded or landslide is happening suddenly. So all these maps are available, I think, and we need to do location specific hazard map, I mean vulnerability map, and at the same time the land use and land cover also can be considered to make a plan for this resettlement plan as well. So I think there is a gap between the planning process. It's not about the landslide and erosion is happening in a random place. Thank you. So any
There are two more questions, but I think we should take Shahryar's question first because he has his hand raised from a very long time, and then there's one on methodology.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah. So before I ask the question, I'll need 30 seconds just to explain the context. The context is I've been doing a research for almost 2 years in the world's largest refugee camp that's in Bangladesh. That's on education, but I found that there's lots of examples of compound disaster risks. So now in this context, obviously we cannot move them out of the camp, and the government's decision is actually dependent on other external factors. So under that situation, how do you manage compound disaster risk? In a refugee camp, for instance, floods and cyclones and fires, these are constantly there.
Yeah. Thank you. I think the refugee camp you were mentioning, I'm aware about.
It's in Cox's Bazar.
Cox's Bazar, yes. Actually, I'm one
so
of.
it's got more than 1 million.
Right. I know quite well because my student was also employed for a couple of years in that camps. So yeah. So one part is the camp was established in that location. Maybe not in a proper way, in a sense like it's not very much right place to establish.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's actually located. It's located in a hilly area, and they are assuming that okay, once the people leave, refugees are repatriated, then they will,
lower level. Maduman ka kami sa summit. Ang ating mahiling ko.
I got
the thing.
Yeah.
Because they are under the assumption that after they return, then that's why they didn't build any permanent structure. That's the main thing. These are all makeshift houses, and that's why, because there's a group of people who've been relocated to you can say an island that's Hashanchor, and when I went there, they have actually permanent structures, food, then housing and everything, and there's a minimum risk of disaster, compound disaster there. But here, because of the location, it's in hilly area, deliberately the government did not build a permanent structure. These are all made of bamboo and other things like that. That's the main thing. If the government wanted to build permanent structures, they could. But then, once the repatriation takes place, which is again hypothetical, the thing is, then the natural, growth will not be recovered. That's the main thing.
Right.
The government, this is kind of hush-hush thing. Government, people know that repatriation is not going to take place. But on pen and paper, they are still expecting, okay, repatriation will take place.
Right. Now, one of the major concern, because I was also working on one of some of the IDP camps in even Africa. So one concern is like the location selection of the camp area are maybe not very much done following the vulnerability situation. So their location is itself vulnerable from before. I mean, before they came, before you established the camp. So it is not actually getting vulnerable or more disaster prone after the people actually started staying there. It was actually vulnerable location before. So you should choose the location some extent carefully, which is less prone than other places. So I think the choice and choosing the location, especially the reconstruction location or displaced location, are one of the key areas where we should focus. Our current, just explain on this point, like current, Professor Paula is very much aware about that. Like we're working with IOM to understand the hotspot and the cold spots, like which are the areas which are hotspot for the displacement, and which are the areas are the cold spot, maybe low displacement, and maybe we can think about shifting if possible or if required in that places, because that is very low vulnerable location. So choosing the location for displaced people are very much very important actually. In that case, I'll quote maybe Fiji having very interesting like policy on that, to choose the location and to resettlement process. Maybe due to the time constant, we could not discuss very long. It was very interesting. I'm very thankful, like all of you are, I mean, asking questions, and also it's interactive. So I like that. I mean, so thank you. Yeah. Any more questions I are missing?
Maybe there's a rather long question on methodology. Since we are running out of time, maybe he or she, whoever wants to discuss questions, can write to you. If that's possible, because there's a rather long question on methodology. If you wish to answer that, you could, and probably that's going to be the last question.
Yeah, because again, 2 or 3 other people like Reza and Hanif, they also wanted to ask questions. So, Dr. Pal, is it okay if we send you the questions and you can respond to them?
Absolutely.
Lovely.
Professor Paula, maybe better. I mean, that for the methodology, I'll send the detailed paper also on the exactly on the.
Okay, that will be wonderful. That will be
You
wonderful,
get
because
the
a lot
whole
of these people are doing
sample
research.
numbers and the process of the statistics, what applied and all this. So all details will be available there. So I'll send that paper to Priya or to Madam, and you can get this. I think all entire group.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
And my
Thank you
email
very much.
email is also available. If please feel free to ask me any question in later time also. I'll be happy to respond.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Pal, for your time and for that very, very informative and engaging discussion that we had. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think everybody today learned very much, a lot, enough information. And so, whatever you can send us, please send us. We will distribute it among the participants.
Absolutely. I'll send this.
Thank you.
Thank you
So
okay.
much.
Thank you.